I was like, okay, what's this for? I can't remember.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the .bank webinar brought to you by Lexsynergy. My name is Marina Tigner, and I am the Sales and Marketing Manager at Lexsynergy. Lexsynergy is a global domain name management and online brand protection company with offices in the UK, Austria, Australia, South Africa, and San Diego, which is where I am based. We are pleased to join us for today's call, and we hope you find this information useful. I would now like to introduce the presenters for today's webinar. First, we have Daniel Greenberg. Daniel is the CEO and founder of Lexsynergy. He is also an intellectual property attorney with over 15 years of experience in trademarks, copyright, domain names, and brand enforcement online. We're also happy to have Craig Schwartz joining us on today's call. Craig is the Managing Director of TLD Registry Services, which is the official registry of .bank and was formed by a coalition of banks, insurance companies, and financial trade associations from around the world. On this webinar, Daniel and Craig will be taking you through the entire registration process for a .bank domain name. We will leave some time at the end of the call for questions and answers, so if you have any questions, please send those through the chat function on the WebEx. Also, we would like to offer everyone on today's call a complimentary one-on-one .bank strategy session. During this session, we will craft a strategy that is tailored to your company's needs, and we'll cover that a bit more at the end of the call. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Daniel to start the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Marina. I would just like to also ask the attendees just to mute their microphones when they do dial in. We're trying to do it on our end, but we have to do it individually. So if you do have that option in your phone, that would be appreciated. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for attending this webinar. I'd also like to thank Craig Schwartz from the .bank registry for taking the time to participate in this webinar. And due to the restricted nature of .bank and the verification process, which is uncommon in this industry, Craig and I will be able to answer any questions you may have regarding .bank. We are recording this webinar, so we'll upload it to our website tomorrow. Okay. Here is a quick glance at the topics we'll cover in this webinar. At the end of the webinar, you should have an understanding of how .bank works. And as Marina said, we'll work with you to develop a strategy so that you are prepared to secure your .bank domain names at each relevant launch stage. So before diving into .bank, it's important to set the scene of the new generic top-level domains or new GTLDs to see how .bank fits into the launch of hundreds of new domain name extensions. So we're all aware of the current extensions such as .com, .net, .org, .info, .biz. Now there are about 500 more of them with another 400 still to launch. And these will launch over the coming months. The intention behind these launches of these new GTLDs is to provide Internet users with more choice of extensions that are relevant to their interests and business. Now, with so many extensions out there, it can be overwhelming, but the problem can be solved with a strategic action plan focusing on domain names that are specific to your industry. In this regard, we've listed some extensions that are relevant to the banking as well as financial services sector. So as you can see, looking at this particular page, you see .bank, .cash, .credit card, .finance, .fund, .insurance, .holdings. So a lot of these TLDs have launched and are obviously applicable to this particular industry. Now, we need to look at the parties involved with .bank. So firstly, FTLD, which is the registry or operator of the TLD for .bank. Then there's Lexsynergy, which is a .bank registrar. We're accredited to sell .bank domain names to you, the registrant. It's not possible for banks or registrants to go directly to the registry to register domain name. So you would have to use currently one of the 6 registrars that have signed an agreement with FTLD to register .bank domain names. And not every registrar will offer them because of the restrictions and requirements that are in place to register this particular extension. I would now like to hand it over to Craig to explain what .bank is.
TLD registry, an opportunity to talk more about the .bank registry and to participate in this webinar. So at the onset of the formation of this company, as Marina mentioned, it's formed, owned, operated, and governed by a coalition of banks, insurance companies, and their respective trade associations. The idea was to create a relevant, identifiable, more secure space on the internet, particularly in the face of this massive expansion of new top-level domain extensions, to build something that gave banks and other members of the banking community a place to brand themselves and to participate in a newer and different way than what's currently available in the more common domains that you're all used to. We are committed to serving our registrars and providing them with as much information as we can, and likewise with all of you potential .bank domain name registrants. We are a much different registry than any TLD that exists now, and as Daniel has already alluded to, there are restrictions for entry into the space that will require some additional work and commitment on registrars' parts and also the registrants, and we will be there to help everyone along the way. And maybe just in closing, to highlight that we view getting your domain and activating it in the .bank space very much as a two-part process. The first being to make sure that you get in early and get aligned with a registrar to make sure you have the best chance of getting the domain names that you'd like to have. And secondly, activating or turning them on and being in compliance with the various technical and operational requirements for participating in .bank. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Daniel, and certainly I'm available anytime after this webinar by email or by phone if any of the participants have particular follow-up questions. Thanks, Daniel.
Great. Thank you, Craig. Also, I remind you that you can paste in or insert your comments or questions in the chat function on WebEx. Like Craig said, .bank has an enhanced security feature, which is the driving force behind this particular TLD. I'd just like to expand on some of them in this particular slide over here. The real benefit of .bank is a security creating a protected, trusted, more secure avenue for banks to interact and do business online. The first bullet point over there, where it deals with mandatory verification, that is very important in that it makes sure that only banks get a .bank domain name. The second bullet point ensures the ongoing eligibility of registrants to hold that particular domain name. So that is during the renewal process and as time progresses. Then it deals with DNSSEC as well. I'm not an IT person, but what that basically does is it makes sure that the page you're on is the bank's website and that you have not been misdirected to a malicious website. So there's added security in that respect. Also, there's email authentication, which prevents spoofing, phishing, and other malicious activities propagated through emails. There's also multi-factor authentication, which ensures that change to registrant data is only made by an authorized representative of the bank. The enhanced encryption also lays out practices to protect the registrant, registry, and registrar. And lastly, privacy services. A privacy service is usually a service that conceals the true identity of a registrant. This is not allowed for .bank. You have to use your bank information as well as the contact of a person working at the bank using their personal name so that they are identifiable, and this would be displayed on the WHOIS. Now, obviously, the most important question is who can register a .bank? In short, banks can register a .bank domain name, which obviously makes sense. But for example, credit unions are excluded from this, However, core processors running online services for banks will be able to register domain names for their clients, but this is limited. Craig can expand on this if you have any questions. Obviously, it's specific to U.S. operations, although this can extend to the European Union as well. So if you have any questions regarding that, you can raise that with us. The most important part as well is the name selection process. What names are allowed? The domain name should match your trademark, your business name, or terms used by your bank. Certain generic words and common community names will be reserved, meaning that you cannot register them. This list will be communicated with you when we develop your strategy to make sure that your domain names do not fall foul of the name selection process. For example, two-character domain names are not allowed. Also, IDNs, which are internationalized domain names, those are domain names written in non-Latin script. Those are not supported by the TLD, as well as country names. What's also important to mention is that names that are likely to deceive or cause material detriment will not be allowed as well. So it's important to make sure that your domain names do not fall foul of that. But this would obviously be laid out during the strategy process that we undertake with you. How to register a .bank domain name. Now, this is obviously specific to the services that we offer, but it should not really differ with the various registrars that are participating in the launch of .bank. So I'll expand on each part of the registration process in the next few slides. So the first is step one. I know that some of the banks that have signed into this webinar do not have a registered trademark. Some do. So I'll briefly touch on trademarks if you do have a registered trademark. The first step is, if you do have a registered trademark, the sunrise period, which is the priority period, which is exclusively reserved for trademark owners to reserve their domain name that matches their trademark. That is a very important part of the registration process. The reason being is that you get to reserve your domain name at the first available opportunity. But it's not good enough just to have a registered trademark. Your trademark has to be validated with the Trademark Clearinghouse, of which we are an agent. So your trademark would have to be submitted to them. The costs are laid out in this particular slide. And once it's validated, they would allocate an SMD file, which basically identifies you as the trademark owner during the registration process. So this is the first step if you do have a trademark. If you don't have a trademark, we'll deal with that later on, identifying the period where you would register your particular domain name. The next step is, once you have validated your mark, is to set up an account, for example, with us. We would then create a contact template, which we call a handle. This would be the information that you would use to register your domain name. So in there, we would make sure that the bank information is correct, that it matches any registration certificates you have or banking license documents, as well as making sure that the telephone number, email address, and the person you allocate as the contact is correct, because this has a direct implication during the verification process, in that if any information is incorrect, it may delay or frustrate the registration process. Then what we would then do is add the domain names to our queuing system. I must explain that this is not a pre-registration service. We do not offer pre-registration services, since that is not a, I'd say, a legitimate service, in that you can't pre-register a domain name. So what we do is we import the domain names onto a queuing system. So the minute the TLD opens for registration, we submit your registrations at the first available opportunity. There is a risk that other banks may be applying for the same domain name, so we cannot guarantee that you'd be the first in, but that again stresses the point that you need to make sure that you do submit your applications as soon as possible and not wait too long when a particular launch period opens, as you may lose out to other banks in this process. Then payment would obviously be submitted for the applications, and then we would submit the application for you when the launch date happens. Step 3A, we've divided that because 3A and 3B really overlap. 3A deals with the information that you will provide when registering a domain name. You may be asked at a later stage to provide documentary support, or evidence, but this is not required during the submission of your registration request. But it's very important to make sure that you do have this information available should it be requested. So we would pre-vet this information to make sure that when you do submit your application, that the information is correct. The second part of step 3 is 3B. This is where Symantec will verify the information that you have submitted is correct. They would, for instance, call the particular company to make sure that the person mentioned on the contact information is in fact an employee and authorized to represent the bank. And it's very important that you then contact the various people within the company, maybe the HR department, to make sure that they can answer the relevant questions to make sure that you pass this verification process. Then after that, your domain name should proceed to registration. Craig, I see that you'd like to go back to the Trademark Clearinghouse.
If I could just for one brief moment, Daniel, and it's several slides back. So for many of the participants that are on the phone today or on the webinar, I just wanted to clarify that you may very well have a local or state registered trademark or even a common law right to a mark based upon years and years of usage. It's important to understand that the Trademark Clearinghouse accepts only certain types of trademarks. And an example of that would be a nationally registered mark if you're here in the United States with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. It's also important to note that you don't have to have a trademark in the clearinghouse to get a domain name in .bank. So based on the fact that we've gotten lots of questions at FTLD about trademarking, just wanted to remind everyone that it's not a requirement, that if you haven't already started the process in your jurisdiction for a nationally registered mark, it's likely too late to start that now, and it's probably not necessary. So again, if anyone has questions about the TMCH, you can either follow up with Daniel or myself after the call. Thanks, Daniel.
Yes, so thank you for clarifying that. That is correct. You obviously need a registered trademark to submit that to the Trademark Clearinghouse. In some cases, some parties have gone through Andorra or Switzerland to try and get a quick registration. It takes about a couple of weeks to get a registration there. But as Craig mentioned, if you had to submit a trademark application now to the USPTO, it would take between 9 months to a year, so you would miss out on the sunrise anyway. But like Craig says, you can register without having a trademark, and that is during the GA stage, which we'll come to in a subsequent slide. The next slide, we set out the different launch periods. So we've already discussed the TMCH, which is reserved for trademark owners. That will start on the 18th of May and last until the 16th of June. Then that moves over to the Founders Program, which starts the 17th of June till the 23rd of June. I must remind you, these are estimated launch times, so they may be subject to change. Then the general availability stage is the stage where it will be open to all banks to register without restrictions. So if you don't have a trademark, it doesn't really matter. Anyone can apply, any bank, should I say, can apply during that stage. The next few slides just expand on what I've mentioned there. So I'll skip the TMCH, which we've already discussed. What you must also remember is that each phase is a first-come, first-served registration process, unlike other new GTLDs where they only allocate the domain names at the end of a particular period. This is first come, first served. So it's very important that you get your application in as soon as possible. The limited registration period, that is the period reserved for founder members of the .bank TLD. So if your bank isn't listed on the Founders Program, then you wouldn't be able to apply during this particular stage. And this, again, is also a first-come, first-served registration process. Then the next is the general availability, and this is where most banks would register their domain names, as you may have particular brands or products that you don't have a trademark for and that you would like to register. So this is where the queuing system is very important, and to make sure that you have made the necessary plans to submit your application as soon as possible, where we would queue it and then submit it as the application process opens. Another factor is obviously cost. The .bank TLD is a slightly more expensive domain name when you compare it to a .com. Obviously, there's more security involved in it. There's the verification process. It is also restricted to banks. So what we've done is we've set our pricing at $994.50 for the first domain name. Then your second and third would be $910. And then for 4 more domain names, the price would come down to $880. This price is applicable to all the various stages, so there's no price difference between the various launch stages, and this is also the price for the renewal. So you would have to pay that price each year to keep your domain name maintained. So that was a brief run through the .bank TLD. If you have any questions, you can raise them now by inserting your comments in the chat box. Marina, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Yes, if there are any questions at this time, please feel free to enter them through the chat function. If not, we are definitely available via email or phone call after the webinar if you do have any questions. You can send those to myself at marina@lexsynergy.com. That's MARINA @lexsynergy.com, or to our support team, which is support@lexsynergy.com. And we just do want to remind everyone that we are offering the free strategy session to review the best plan of action for registering your .bank domain name. So if you would like to schedule that, please email us or give us a call.
Thank you. I see we have some questions coming in. The first one is, without a trademark, do you still pay the validation fee? No, you don't. So the validation fee is only applicable if you have a trademark. So if you don't and you just want to apply during the GA stage, the general availability stage, this is the price you would pay for one domain name, which is $994.50. We will make a copy of the slides available to each participant. We will email them to you, as well as put up the webinar on our website. This is a question that I think Craig can expand on. I'll try and answer, but Craig, just correct me if I'm wrong. The question is, in the Founders Program, it mentioned the Canadian Bankers Association. So if a bank was a member of that association, could they apply during the Founders phase? I don't know if you'd want to deal with that.
Sure. So the short answer to that is no. It's the Canadian Bankers Association that's the founder member, and participation in Founders would be restricted to them, just as is the American Bankers Association or the Independent Community Bankers of America. It's restricted only to the founder associations.
Thank you. The next question is, without a trademark, do we still try? Let me just go up. Do we try to get our information in as early as possible, or do we wait until June 24 to request? So I would advise that you at least have a strategy beforehand, and about a week before submit your requests to us so we can place it in the queuing system so we can pre-vet. And it's very important to pre-vet your information because, for instance, some information may be incorrect and it may affect your registration. So it's very important at least that that is settled as soon as possible so you don't have to wait till the last minute to submit that. I'm just going through there quite a few questions. So the next question is, without a registered trademark, do we have to wait until the general filing, or can we participate during the sunrise? So the sunrise is only for registered trademark owners that have validated their mark with the clearinghouse. So if you don't have a trademark or a validated trademark, then you have to wait till the GA stage. You cannot participate before that.
Daniel, if I could add, for banks that are considering trying to go the trademark route and the validation route, perhaps in another jurisdiction where things might move more quickly than here in the United States, it's also important to remember that during the sunrise period, you're only entitled to apply for an exact match of the name of your registration, of your registered mark. So if you are ABC Community Bank, the only domain name you could apply for during sunrise is abccommunitybank.bank, which may not be what you really would like to have. So keep in mind there are extra costs and time considerations in going with the trademark clearinghouse process, and that you're very limited in what you can have to that being an exact match of your registered mark.
And then, Craig, we have another question posed here. It says, please explain why it is more secure, why this is a more secure channel than a .com or a .net domain name.
Sure, happy to take that. So what adds to the security of the domain are many of the enhanced security requirements that Daniel already mentioned. The DNSSEC requirement, which ensures that when someone is visiting a website that is enabled with DNSSEC, that they're actually getting to the page they intended to get to and haven't been misdirected or redirected to some other place. DNSSEC is one example. The email authentication piece is a requirement for those that will use their domain names for email services. And by setting up the email authentication records as are required by the requirements or in the requirements, the value of that is that you are effectively publishing in the internet space the IP address where you send email from, and it thereby enables the internet service providers, which essentially direct your traffic, to block out or not deliver email that is allegedly coming from a particular bank where the IP address associated with that traffic is not consistent with the IP address that the bank has provided. So it's a little bit of a complicated topic. What FTLD will be doing in the coming months is providing a lot more information about what the security requirements are, what their value is, how to implement them, be it at the registrar level or at the registrant level or the bank level. But the idea is that when you add in total all of the various security components, the enhanced encryption, the DNSSEC piece, the email authentication requirement, when you are effectively wrapping up the domain name much more tightly than is what's happening in other spaces, it becomes a more secure path for communication. If you add on top of that the fact that only certain types of entities can get into .bank, and at that they can only register certain types of domains and use them in certain ways, there is a trust and confidence that comes along with a space that is identified as being in .bank when you know who's gotten in and that they've been vetted before doing so. So there's a host of value-added controls and requirements that simply make .bank and eventually .insurance a much different TLD than what the internet users and its customers are currently used to.
The next question deals with the pricing for .bank and .insurance. These are the pricing we have is only for .bank at the moment, and the pricing that you see on the screen is the one that would apply. The next question asks to re-explain what Craig said about the ICBA and the ICBM, as it wasn't too clear. I think the line was cutting out there.
I apologize. Let me try that again. During the founders period, there are just a very limited number of companies, be they banks, insurance companies, or trade associations, that are founding members of FTLD Registry Services, and it's those entities that are entitled to register domain names in .bank. That right does not extend to the members of those respective trade associations.
And the next question is, do you use a local authority to verify a single bank? And I think that comes down to Symantec, who would verify the information, and they would reach out and contact the particular bank to confirm that that information is correct. Yes?
Yeah, that's correct, Daniel. At least in the United States, your regulatory authority will be the entity that will verify your charter number or license number as being appropriately licensed to operate as a bank, as a bank in the United States. And there are obviously equivalents to the FDIC or the OCC or the Fed in other jurisdictions, and we would be looking to those entities as well in the verification process. That is, Symantec would be engaging with them.
The next question is, can we also register banks' credit card solutions and money remittance solutions? I'm not too sure I understand that correctly, but I assume it is product or a product range that you have, and that obviously depends on the name that you use for that. But if it's a name that you commonly use, that could be registered as a .bank domain name. The next question is, people spoof email from .com domains all the time to look like a .bank. So how would .bank make it any more secure? I don't know, Craig, if you would want to deal with that.
Right. So I'm probably slightly just more technical than Daniel, and this is the email authentication piece that I spoke to a few moments ago. And the records that are required to be associated with your domain name when it's used for email, and it's the association of these records. And if you look at our fact sheet on FTLD.com, it goes into a little bit of detail about the email authentication piece. I think it would be difficult to get into a very deep discussion of it here on this webinar, but the purpose of that function is to identify email with the mail servers at your organization or your bank as being the authoritative place from which email is generated, and to filter out and or not deliver other email that's purporting to be from your bank when it's not.
Okay. And then just a follow-on to that question, they said, what if your bank uses Google Apps for email from a security perspective?
I'm not sure that I understand that question.
It may be it might be through Gmail, from what I understand, if it's routed through the Gmail service. Some people use Gmail to manage their email system.
Right. So we at FTLD Registry Services, we actually just transitioned our email platform over to Google Apps. So we are using that. We don't use Gmail addresses, but we use FTLD.com addresses and have security built into that email application. So I don't see how it would be any different for anybody else.
Okay, great. I think that answers the question over there. You can use your own .bank domain name using Google Apps. The next question is, how soon do you recommend starting this registration, and what needs to be done to start the process? So I think it's the starting point is to identify the domain names that you want to register. Then you can get in touch with us, and we will guide you through the process in setting up the contact information that we'll use when we submit your application, as well as vetting the information and getting any documents that may be requested during the verification process. So for some larger banks, it may take some time in that they may have to go through various departments and channels to get approval for these domain names, because they're obviously not that cheap. So you need to prepare a budget for that. But I think it's very important to start doing that now, because the launch is not too far away and you want to avoid any hiccups along the way. So you can get in touch with us after this webinar, and we'll arrange a one-on-one with you to guide you through the process. I see that seems to be all the questions. If you do have any further questions, please send them to us, and we'll also provide you with Craig's information should you want to get in touch with him directly. So we appreciate your time and for listening to our webinar, and we look forward to working with you on the .bank TLD. Thank you, Craig, for your time. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Daniel and Marina.